Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Welcome back, folks, to part 2 of this special installment. Now, if you recall, last week we began the 17th season with the first half of the Government Worker Special. And, well, we're back here tonight to finish her off. We resumed that bonus episode right where we left off, with an anonymously submitted entry out of the Tar Heel state of North Carolina.
Hey, Derek. I'm a police officer here in North Carolina. There's been a series of events that have happened to me while I was on duty. I've worked for 2 different police agencies in 2 different counties here in North Carolina, one being Stanley and one being Montgomery. The first time I had the incident was when I was running radar on Highway 200 in Stanley County, and this part of the highway is 2-lane road, country. I'm surrounded by 2 tree lines. There's a lot of forest around me. The road is unlit, and it was about 2 in the morning. And, we have those night lulls where, there's not a whole lot of traffic, but I want to get out there and try to stop some cars from speeding. So I'm sitting on the side of the road, pitch black, and all of a sudden I just hear 2 knocks on my window. So we don't have bar lights on our cars. They're internal behind the glass. So what I did was I turned on all the blue lights, and I didn't see a soul. And it freaked me out so much that I left the area. And needless to say, I found a well-lit parking lot to stay in for the rest of the night. But that definitely freaked me out. But the second time that happened, I was maybe a quarter mile away from where the first event happened. And now I'm in the parking lot of a gas station. Again, it's about 1 or 2 in the morning. And I'm just sitting on the side of the road running radar again. And again, 2 knocks on the window. I could have chalked the first one up to coincidence, but it happened twice in 2 different locations on the same stretch of highway. So I really couldn't explain it until the third event, which happened about a week ago. The first event happened back in 2021. This last event happened about a week ago. Now I'm a police officer here in Montgomery County, and we're right in the middle of the Uwharrie National Forest. I was sitting again on the side of the road on NC 134, and it was about 2 in the morning, maybe 3, and, I hear the knock again. And I'm thinking, it's about this time, February, it gets cold here in North Carolina. The heat's going on the car, and I'm thinking maybe, the car is flexing and I'm not used to this vehicle. And I didn't put too much stock into it. And about 10 minutes later, I'm on my phone. It's 2 in the morning. It's pretty slow. And about 10 minutes later, at the corner of my eye, I see a shadow. Now, mind you, I'm in a really dark area, not very well lit. And this thing I see at the corner of my eye is darker than anything that's in my surrounding. I couldn't explain it. And the one baffling thing about this thing I saw was that it had 2 amber glowing eyes, and they were looking at me as it was shifting from left to right. Internally I was freaking out, goosebumps, everything. I told myself, I was like, what the F is that? And I tried not to acknowledge it. I was still looking at my phone. And not 10 seconds later, all I heard on my car was... And that's when I said, screw this. I put the patrol car in drive, and I got out of there as soon as I could. I booked it, stayed in, another well-lit parking lot for the rest of the night. Back in the day when I was talking to my partner, I thought maybe people would think I was crazy if I told them this, but, I asked my partner if he'd seen things around town, and he asked me to be specific. And I asked him, I was like, do you see shadows or shadow people around town? And he said, yeah. He sees them pretty much every night. And I told him the same thing. I said, dude, I see them every night that I'm on duty. There's been incidents, sightings at the police department. Me and him have both experienced things at the police department while driving around town at night because we were permanent night shift. I wanted to chalk it up to, it's night shift. We're tired. We don't get much sleep. Maybe we're seeing things, but how are two police officers on the same shift in different locations most of the time seeing the same thing, having the same occurrences? We'll be at the police department and we'll feel like something's watching us. Something's there with us. We can feel a presence. So that's my story. Catch you later. You're doing a great job of the show. Bye, Derek.
Thank you, caller. Now, this story is somewhat reminiscent of a call I fielded in the first half of this special episode. The one where a group of firemen witnessed some sort of shadow entity while driving back from a false alarm. Now, outside of that detail, I couldn't find any other similarities in these two calls. But perhaps both stories detailing a black, anomalous figure is plenty unique enough. And I probably shouldn't get as big a kick out of this as I do, but the idea of a ghost or spirit relentlessly pestering a cop that's trying to do speed control, well, that just cracks me up. Some poor spirits out there doing the Lord's work. Well, an officer in his squad car experiencing something unusual. Well, that can be written off due to stress or long working hours. But how would you explain away an entire station being haunted? Because that's exactly what has been happening in the Espanola, New Mexico police station, as demonstrated by this report by KOAT, ABC News 7, out of Albuquerque.
It started out as a pretty typical Saturday night. Espanola police officer Carl Romero was on duty, keeping an eye on the surveillance cameras around the station, when he saw something in the sally port.
At first I thought it was like a polilla, like a fly, a moth, and then I saw the legs and it was a human.
But not a real human?
No, it was just a ghost.
So Romero reported it and told his supervisors. Detectives showed us the camera that captured the image. They say there is no way in or out of the secured area without an open gate and alarm sounding. Detectives say there's no logical explanation for this, not an issue with the lighting or a technical glitch. Turns out there are a lot of ghost stories around here.
A lot of our officers have seen certain things. Some of our officers have felt what appears to be somebody breathing down their neck as they're working on reports in the briefing room.
Cops at the station also report hearing strange noises in the middle of the night and seeing unexplainable images in the lobby area too. Espanola police tell us as far as they know, this is not an ancient burial ground, and they say the police station has been here since 2006, but no inmates have died here. But they do say there have been some unsolved murders nearby.
Creepy stuff. And thank you again, caller, for setting it all up. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Have you ever felt like you really needed to get something off your chest, but you just didn't feel comfortable talking about it with someone you know? We all carry stress differently, and keeping that bottled up is not easy or good for our health. Thankfully, therapy is a safe space to spill your guts and figure out how to work through what's weighing you down. Therapy has given me a place to work through difficult emotions that I didn't quite feel comfortable working through anywhere else, and wasn't equipped to work through on my own. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, which makes it convenient, flexible, and affordable. Just fill out a quick questionnaire to be matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapist at any time for no additional charge. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/Monsters Among Us today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Monsters Among Us. Now, as always, supporting our sponsors supports the show. So thanks for listening. Now back to those three strange men staring in your window. Well, for those of you that weren't with us on the Beyond, welcome to the second and final installment of the Season 17 premiere, The Government Workers Special. Now, I trust you've had as much fun listening to these calls as I have had playing them. And I'm pleased but not surprised by both the quantity and the quality of calls we've received. We've had quite the variety submitted, ranging from ghosts and aliens to strange creatures, skinwalkers, and even the men in black, as demonstrated by this entry from an unknown caller.
Hi, Derek. I'm calling with a story that's not actually mine, and it's for your upcoming segment about government things that might possibly go bump in the night. I was married to a man for several years whose father worked in the military. And although this isn't technically about specter, ghost, or things of that nature, it's rather interesting. He was the youngest child of a few, and they lived back east. The father was rather high-ranking, and he kept, according to my ex-husband's memory, he kept a lot of documents at their home, the family home, in the basement near the furnace that heated the house. And when he was younger, he remembers one night hearing people outside his bedroom window. And when he looked outside, he saw men dressed in black with flashlights walking up, surrounding the house, at least coming up to the windows, and his older brother coming in, collecting him, and climbing with him up to the attic, out through the attic window, down some way down the side of the house, avoiding detection by these individuals who had come to the house, and put my ex-husband in a wagon and drug him into the forest, where they slept overnight and didn't come back to the house till the morning. And when they got back in the morning, the house was turned inside out. Nobody said anything about anything. And that's really all there was of the story. It kind of ended there with this great mystery. But I do know that as my ex-husband got older, his father did tell him once that if anything happens to him, that he should then my ex-husband should go to the basement and throw all the documents that are down there into the furnace and not tell anybody about them. So I always thought that was kind of an interesting story. I hope it helps a little. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, caller, for sharing that entry. It sounds like someone had some materials on them that they weren't supposed to have. That can get you in some serious heat. And it's hard to say if those were indeed men in black, or if they were simply government muscle. But sometimes I suppose it's difficult to differentiate between the two. Either way, it made for an interesting story, and reminded me of the opening of an Indiana Jones installment or something. Climbing off the roof into a wagon, darting into the forest, all the while avoiding G-Men. I'd probably watch that. So thank you again, caller, for sharing the story. Now, folks, if you too have a story you would like to share here on the program, please call our hotline at 888-608-NIGHT That's 888-608-NIGHT. Or record your story on your cell phone and email the file to me at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com. Now, let's get back into the action with this eerie entry from Joel in Georgia.
Hey, this is Joel from the state of Georgia, calling in for your government workers episode. I grew up in a small town called Jonesboro, south of Atlanta. Jonesboro was the site of a 2-day pretty bloody battle during the American Civil War. And of course, I grew up fascinated with history and everything that happened. Well, after I graduated from college, I went to work for the city for one of my first jobs. And City Hall was in a really old house. I don't think it was from the Civil War, but it was like early 1900s. Working there, a lot of stuff happened. I was kind of working IT on, so I'd work late nights, where wouldn't interfere with people working during the day. And almost every time I worked late, I would hear footsteps walking around. I'd have cold chills come over me. One night, a filing cabinet flipped over in another office. Doors would shut. But the weirdest thing that would always happen would be there would be one restroom that was in the house where the cold and hot water would always be turned on wide open when I would walk by it, and I would be the only one working there late at night. I mean, it's an old house. It's not like a big building where people could hide, but I worked there. I also worked at the police department, which is the main story I wanted to share with you. One of my duties working back and forth between City Hall and the police department is they had me analyzing alarm calls. The city had an alarm ordinance where if you had so many false alarms, we'd send you a letter and warn you. And there was this one building over and over and over and over that had so many false alarms going off. Of course, growing up, I knew a lot of the history of the town. This one building, it was a pre-war home. It was a funeral home for a long time. And the history of the house is the guy that lived there made caskets for the Confederate Army during the Atlanta campaign. And it was a funeral home for many years after the war, up into the 1900s. But now it was a real estate office. It had an upstairs, where they would embalm, work on the bodies, a sleuth where the bodies would come up and down. But anyway, I had so many false alarms. And I was talking to one of the ladies that worked there at City Hall at the time, and her son was fairly young, and he was one of the police officers. And she said, I got a story about that place. Of course, you got to know police officers, they don't share a whole lot. But she was telling me what her son had told her, that really late one night, they went on an alarm call there. The owner met them there pretty late at night, and they went in to check to see if it was being burglarized. And they heard somebody running around, just making a racket. And so story I heard is the two officers, they drew their weapons and they're looking through the house and they're hearing footsteps. They hear footsteps run up those stairs to the upstairs of the building. They chase it up there, and because they think they're right behind somebody, they get upstairs. Nobody's there. They come back downstairs, and in the middle of one of the rooms, they look and see this wooden chair that just starts sliding on its own, and it just creaks and pulls and moves, from one end of the room to the center. And they look at each other and they're like, yeah, it's time to get out of here. And they talked to the owner about it, and the owner said, yeah, that chair moves every morning when we come in. It's in different places. Anyway, the city is just filled with stories like that. It's now a very urbanized area south of Atlanta, but a lot of history there and a lot more ghost stories and supernatural, I could tell, but that's one that always stood out to me. And when you start poking around at buildings that have a lot of alarms, there were other ones besides this one, there's a reason those alarms are being set off in the middle of the night. Anyway, enjoy the podcast. Thanks for all you do. Bye.
Thank you, Joel. Disembodied footsteps, flipped over filing cabinets, running faucets. Yeah, that sounds like a haunted place to me. Toss in all the former funeral home false alarms, and it sounds like Jonesboro, Georgia, just might be a paranormal hotspot. Now, this wasn't government work per se, but the production company I used to work for in Beverly Hills was said to be haunted. The reports that were shared with me claim a set of high heels could be heard walking over the slate floor. Now, this occurrence always happened late at night or early in the morning, because from time to time our international sales team would be in the building early because of time differences in Europe and Asia, or my department, the production department, would be in there late coordinating shipments to filming locations all over the world. But before I worked in that department, I worked as a production assistant there in the office. It was entry-level work for us newbies, a job typically reserved for the children of the wealthy and famous. How I managed to Forrest Gump my way into that position, I will never know. But the salary was criminal. It was legitimately impossible to try to get by without a side hustle, or taking another gig, or having rich parents. So I cut a deal with our IT guy to do some work for him on the side, updating computer hardware and software, scanning documents, stuff he was too valuable to waste time on. Now, looking back, I'm very thankful for his help in those days, so thank you, Marcus. But that meant I found myself alone in the building, at night or early in the morning, all the time. And let me tell you, things did get creepy fast. The lights automatically go out at 8 p.m. The hum of the electronics by then has subsided. Each of the executive offices shrouded in shadows. All the cubicles were quiet and dark. Headlights from passing cars would illuminate the 8-foot werewolf costumes we had propped up in the corner, next to an array of other creepy-as-hell film props. Now, I never encountered a ghost there, but I did hear sounds on the regular that I could not explain. And like Joel, the building's alarm would sometimes go off with no explanation. And I'd swear I'd hear one of the side doors open and close, accompanied by the familiar beep beep of the alarm system. I'd make my way over to the door, about a 10 or 15 second walk, only to realize no one was there, and there were no cars in the parking lot. Now, I'd hear crashes coming from the other side of the building, but of course I'd find nothing. It wasn't enough to call it paranormal, but enough to give me the chills on certain occasions. But in the back of my head, I was always a little spooked there at night, not because of the ghostly stories sent us around the building, but rather because unhinged fans of our films would try to sneak into the building from time to time, hoping to catch a glimpse of a movie star or get their pitch heard by producers. I'm sure they were disappointed to see me sitting there instead, probably eating a sandwich surfing the internet. But my fear was that I'd open an office door only to find said person hiding somewhere within. Or worse, hiding inside of one of those werewolf suits. Now, there is a bit of a government tie-in, because the building we had our offices in was once a garage owned by the city of Beverly Hills. It was a garage in which they stored their construction equipment. Of course, it'd been remodeled since then. Thank you, Joel, for calling in, and for giving me an opportunity to talk about myself just a little bit.
What was the program?
Year-end review.
Now, when I first conceptualized the theme for the season 17 premiere, there was one place I was hoping I would receive a call regarding, given that it's the government worker special. And we touched on it a bit in the beginning of the first installment, but my thirst was not quenched. I need more Smithsonian lore. So here to hopefully up the ante is Logan from the state of Oklahoma.
Hey Derek, this is Logan, and I'm from Norman, Oklahoma. And before COVID, I was living out in Washington, D.C., and I wasn't really a typical D.C. citizen. I was kind of a bohemian living with a bunch of artists, and I wasn't really a government employee, a Fed, or a spook of that nature, but I did work around a lot of them. For a couple of years, I worked at Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, and I would get to work on my bike, and depending on what entrance I used to get into the museum. Fun fact, if I went into the northern entrance, I would actually kind of pass by Grover Krantz's skeletal remains. His remains, along with his dog, are on display, and he was one of the scientists who made Sasquatch. He kind of put Sasquatch on the map, the mainstream map, if you will, and I'm sure he got a lot of flack for that. But me being the oddball that I kind of am, I would kind of always give him a nod every time I walked by him. If I rode my bike onto the opposite side of the museum, I could actually go down to the sublevel, and I could use the freight elevator to take my bike and myself up to one of the top levels where I worked in some of the archives. And this freight elevator that I would use all the time was absolutely enormous. And I've worked in a lot of different museums in different states. And this is without a doubt, this thing was, it was the size of like a large room. Probably, 2, even 3 stories high. That may be kind of a little too much, but very tall, very, very big freight elevator. In fact, I would kind of joke, I would call it the Sasquatch elevator. And I'm sure you and maybe some of your listeners know that of the supposed remains that the Smithsonian housed of giants. And so I always did kind of like to think that they would maybe move those remains around in that kind of freight elevator. But there was one day that I was going home from work, and I was going down from the top levels down to the sub-level, and with my bike, and I was usually in there alone, and then sometimes, rarely, it would stop and someone else would get on. And there was one time this gentleman got on, and he was probably around my age and fairly attractive, and so it piqued my interest, and I started having a conversation with him. And I mentioned, I kind of cracked a joke with him, saying, I don't know if there's enough room in this, this elevator for both of us. And I mentioned that I always liked to think about the idea of them carting around Sasquatch remains, kind of going up and down different levels, kind of quietly and secretly, kind of moving these things from archive to archive. And when we were getting down to the lower levels, he got off a little bit before me, and as he was getting off with his bike, he actually turned and looked at me, and he said, "Yeah, and all the other cryptids as well." And by the time that I could, really kind of, other than laugh, at that, the doors closed and the elevator kept moving down. I always wondered what he really meant by that, if he was actually joking or if there was actually something to it. So that's my story, and I actually hope to get back out there one day and continue this investigation. Thank you very much for your podcast. I truly enjoy it. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Logan. What other cryptids might he be referring to? Now, Logan mentioned Grover Krantz. Photos of that gentleman can be found in the show notes. And Logan is spot on. Krantz was a well-respected anthropologist, Bigfoot researcher, and one of the infamous 4 horsemen of Bigfootery, along with Rene DeHinden, Peter Byrne, and John Green. The four men said to bring the first bit of credibility to the study of Sasquatch. The godfathers, if you will. Well, here's a clip of the late Grover Grants discussing the creature Patterson and Gimlin filmed back in 1967.
The Patterson subject walks with the body leaning forward and the knees largely bent, so that when it takes a step, it supports the leg with a bent knee and keeps 2 feet on the ground for an unusual length of time. It also lifts the foot very high behind each step. In addition to all those things, it also swings the arms, which is very difficult to imitate. Well, this is something I can do for a few steps very poorly, but the Patterson subject did it for over 300 feet. I doubt that any human being could be trained to do that.
Now, he was certainly an interesting fella. And the bones that Logan was referring to are those of Grants and his dog, an Irish wolfhound named Clyde, articulated and displayed there at the Smithsonian. Hit up the show notes to see an image. The bones were actually arranged to mimic an older photograph of Grants and his hound. I gotta say, it's morbidly fascinating. But as for the Smithsonian itself, according to Delaney's research, there are over 148 million objects entered into the collection there. So by chance alone, there has to be a few paranormally themed objects there. And as we learned in the first installment, maybe even giant's bones. So given these inclusions, it may not come as a surprise that people have claimed for years that the Smithsonian itself is not only haunted by ghosts, but possibly infested by them. Listen to this list of some of the spirits said to roam the museum's halls via YouTube's Top 5 Scary Videos.
One of the most haunted items in the Smithsonian is the museum itself. It is haunted by a number of ghosts. As a result, they actually offer ghost tours on location for people interested in the paranormal. On a number of occasions, workers have seen past Smithsonian scientists who would work on the collections there. But the most active ghost is that of the Smithsonian's first curator and second secretary, Spencer Fullerton Bard. Almost all of the night guards at the Smithsonian have seen his ghost wandering the halls. They see him gliding through the halls, people try to talk to him, and then he disappears into thin air. Then you have the ghost of Secretary Joseph Henry that also likes to show his face around town. According to the night guards, they said, and I quote, "Henry is often seen fully clothed in the garments he wore in life, walking through the exhibits before returning to his post. His post being the statue the museum has in place for him." Then you have the countless unidentified entities that also haunt the halls. These are just like black shadowy figures people have seen in passing.
Listen, with a list like that, and the number of potentially haunted objects stored within, if any place can be haunted, it's the Smithsonian. Maybe by Grover Grants himself. Thank you again, Logan, for sharing the entry. Now at long last, I'm finally starting to put a dent in some of these calls. I'd say we're about 3/4 of the way through all of them. And don't worry, we'll return to our regular content next week. But first, I have about a half a dozen or so more of these government worker calls to share with you tonight. Beginning with this one from Kelly, in parts unknown.
Hey Derek, my name is Kelly. I'm a Patreon, and this is for your government workers special. I'm not going to say the name of the agency, but I work for a 3-letter agency. My agency is really small, so it's easier to figure out who I might be. But my agency, we protect wild places all over the United States. And my story takes place when I worked in South Dakota in 2012. I lived in housing, required occupancy housing, and I was gone for training for quite some time and came back and moved to a different housing area I lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, and it was a house that was disconnected from a garage. I had cats at the time and didn't really think anything of it until I got a new job. So I was going to be moving in the next several months to Virginia, to a new place. And my cats at the time, I had 3 of them. I had accepted the job, and it was probably February or March. I was going to be moving in May. And one night I had some friends over, and I had gone to bed early because our shifts at the time were 6 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we had a Wii back in that time. And I remember going to bed early. My friends were staying over, and at the time they had left. My boyfriend that I was dating at the time came to bed, and I woke up in the middle of the night and noticed that there were lights on in this house that I was living in. And I got up. I thought it was very odd, but my boyfriend had come to bed. So I got up and I walked down the hallway and just noticed that every single light was on in the house. And the cats were up playing around, but every light was on. So the outside light, the bathroom light that I never used, the light that was out front was on, and it was just very odd. So I thought, oh man, maybe everybody just got drunk or whatnot and left all the lights on. So I shut all the lights off and I went back to bed and didn't think anything of it. I got up for work the next day and went and contacted my boyfriend at the time, who also worked for the same agency, and I contacted him the next day and I asked him, what the heck, did you leave all the lights on? And he said, no, Kelly, I didn't. I turned them all off and I went to bed, and friends left earlier and I shut everything off. And I said, okay. So I didn't really think anything of it. And I started noticing that when I left for the day, I'd come home for lunch, and the front door of this house that I was renting was a big, heavy door, and the outside was a screen door. So I'd have to make sure that when I pulled the door shut for the day, that it was shut, and pulled the screen door, and so everything would latch. And I would come home, and this happened to me 3 times, where I'd come home and I'd notice that the wooden door was open and the screen door was still shut, but the wooden door was open. And I thought, well, the cats aren't really that strong enough to do that, but they would play all day long because they were kittens. And so I thought it was weird, but never really thought anything of it. And so closer to the day that I was going to be moving, I called a buddy of mine that used to live in the same house. And I told him that I was moving to Virginia. And I said, hey, did anything happen in that house where you used to live? And he said, oh, you haven't met the little boy yet. And I said, little boy? No, I haven't seen anything. I didn't realize that there was a little boy living in the house. And he told me that a couple years prior to that, I think he had lived in the house probably 2 years prior to me, or maybe 3 years. So it would have been in 2010 or 2009. And he said that there was a wildfire in the area, and the superintendent of the place that I was staying called in for a group of Native American wildfire guys, so a hotshot crew, and they were staying at the end of the housing area where we were at, and apparently they had a sweat lodge that night. And ever since the sweat lodge, my buddy had noticed weird things start to happen in the house. So lights would be on, or like what happened to me, the door would be open. And apparently his wife at the time actually saw this little boy in the house. And so ever since the sweat lodge, weird things started to happen. And my buddy told me, well, you have cats. And so he loved playing with our cat as well. And so what happened was the guy moved to Virginia as well with his wife to a new place. And he said, well, boy probably found out that you are going to be moving to a new place and he likes playing with your cats. So that's my story. I didn't think anything of it, and I didn't think a haunting was taking place until I started listening to your podcast and realizing that lights are a big thing. I've worked in many places where our agency protects and I've not had anything happen, but my current place that I work is along the Appalachian Trail, and I definitely know that on some of the shifts that I work, you're the only one in the area and you don't know who's watching you. So thank you, Derek. This is a great place for us to share our stories. Thank you so much for an outlet, and have a great day.
Thank you, Kelly, for your support on Patreon, for your work keeping our wildlands safe, and for sharing the story. Now, you've changed my perspective a bit here, Kelly. And what a sad wrinkle to apply to some of these ghost stories. Because imagine being a ghost in a home. You've somehow befriended the family cat. Over the years, he's grown to become your cat, in a way. Then one day the family and the cat just packs up and moves, leaving you there in an empty home by yourself. Well, let's hope that's not how it works, because that's a bummer. If you apply the human element to some of these entities, it gets to be a bit of a downer pretty quickly. Perhaps that's why most enjoy the spookier version of these ghost stories instead. Stories like Jose's, out of my state of California.
Hey Derek, this is Jose from California. I'm calling for your government workers' stories, and I guess I'll get right into it. So this happened about a year and a half ago, and I worked at a DA's office in one of the Central Valley counties. I specifically worked in the basement level of the DA's office, and this is a really old building that dates back to, I believe, like prior to the 50s, and around that time they had built like these sorts of bunkers and stuff during, I guess, the Cold War era. And at that point, like I said, I was working in the basement with a bunch of other fellow employees, and I had only been working there for a couple of months, and for whatever reason, I guess I just would get bored. I mean, there was one of those jobs where you weren't really supervised that often, so every once in a while I would sneak off into the restroom and just sort of hang out and be on my phone. Well, one day when I did this, I was on my phone in the restroom waiting, just wanting to kill time, and to enter any sort of like employee restrooms, you needed to enter a code, and once you would put that code in, you would have to hit this enter button. And because we were in the basement, everything was really old down there, and so the mechanism to unlock and put the code in just made so much noise. So anytime you would hear somebody trying to get in the restroom, you could hear like every single button they would click, and then once they hit enter, it would like disengage, and then the door would swing open and creak and just make all kinds of noise. And because this was a government office, everybody was dressed in formal wear, and the men, were usually wearing like dress shoes, so you could hear their like sort of like the heels of the shoes click onto the tile of the bathroom. Well, I heard somebody attempting to come in the restroom, and I kind of knew, okay, I probably have to get out of here. I don't want anybody to think that I'm gone for too long. So I told myself I was just going to wait until they finished using the restroom, and then I would get out and leave. Well, I heard them go in the restroom. I heard them walk. I didn't hear any stall close or anything like that, so my assumption was they'd be really quick, and I wouldn't have to wait too long. I just spent that time on my phone looking on different videos or on Twitter or something, and it kind of just sort of passed by. I didn't really realize that I had waited about like 5 or 10 minutes, and this person still hadn't left. So I decided that it was just time for me to walk out. I had probably spent close to like 20 minutes in there, and I didn't want anybody too suspicious. So I walked down, and it immediately hit me that I was waiting for somebody to leave. So as in, I think anybody probably would, I just kind of checked the other stalls. I didn't see anybody in there. I walked over to where the urinals were, and there was no one there. I never heard anybody flush the toilet or wash their hands or anything like that, or open the door. And like I mentioned, we would wear formal wear, and you could hear everything on the tiles, and I didn't hear anything at all. This happened to me multiple times throughout my time there. I only worked there for a little under 2 years, and I told some of my coworkers about it, and no one had ever experienced anything like that before. And it wasn't the only time where I spent for over 10 minutes there waiting for somebody to leave. I would hear different things from people just kind of being in like the file rooms, that it was very eerie and it felt like you were being watched. But other than that, I mean, that was my only experience. I hope you enjoy it. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Jose. That's not the sort of place you want to encounter a ghost. Caught with your pants down, so to speak. And talk about being vulnerable. But we thank you, Jose, for sharing the experience.
He's made the decision for 9 months pay for trying for a third. Closest.
Alright, folks. We're nearing the end of this special episode. But don't you worry. That's where some of the best calls linger. If you don't believe me, perhaps you'll take our next caller's word for it. She's chiming in from Tennessee.
Hi, Derek. I'm going to remain anonymous because I'm calling in about the government worker stories, and I really enjoy my job. Anyways, my story takes place in August of 2021, around the 8th or the 9th of the month to be exact. It was a clear, warm night, and this happened around Chattanooga, Tennessee. My husband, daughter, and granddaughter had taken a vacation to Savannah, Georgia, and we were heading back home from just dropping our granddaughter off in Chattanooga. And at that time, it was around 8:45 p.m., and Chattanooga is an hour ahead of our time in Middle Tennessee, where we live. Anyways, I had already figured out what time we should be arriving home. And just for some background info on me, I was a professional driver for over 20 years, also for the government. So I was always on a driving schedule out of just pure habit. This is why the time is so instilled in my brain to this day. Anyways, we had just dropped our granddaughter off and was driving 24 westbound, just coming out of downtown Chattanooga, when my husband and I were laughing about something on the radio and approaching this really old bridge underpass. I jokingly said, as driving under this bridge, or UFOs. Derek, we both simultaneously looked up at a complete line of triangular crafts, 7 in total, right above the freeway with bright flashing lights of white, green, and red. They were less than 500 feet above our head. I mean, they were just huge. And the word shock doesn't begin to explain our reaction. Not at any time did either one of us mention grabbing the phone to try and take a video or a picture. But in our defense, I was driving around 70 miles an hour, so it was pretty quick and just entirely unexpected. My husband was completely freaked out and tried his best to come up with a logical explanation and turned around in his seat to look back right after we passed under and said, "Where did they go?" Upon which I looked in the rearview mirror and also noticed they were no longer in sight. Which, like I said, it all happened in just a matter of seconds. I didn't even have time to react by slowing down. We did ask our daughter that was in the back seat with headphones at the time if she had saw anything, and no, she saw nothing. As we continued driving, I noticed to the right of us over a field of just open space that a cigar or oblong-shaped craft was now keeping a steady pace with us. No wings on this thing or tail. It was just completely almost like the shape of a blimp, but smaller, just staying at a steady pace with us. Anyways, it looked like it appeared to be something like windows that were emitting light running down the sides. For what seemed to be like 30 minutes to an hour, this happened because by this time I'm also freaked out. I had planned that with no stops made, we should made it home by 11:45 p.m. due to the time change. We've made this trip many times and pretty much had it down to a science. We did not make it home until 2 a.m., which I had not even noticed. My husband was the one that brought it to my attention, but we made no stops. It was just straight home from dropping my granddaughter off. So I don't know if it was from the shock of what happened, trying to frivolously come up with a logical explanation, but we at some point lost 2 hours, if not more, of time that night. We also tried researching to see if anyone had reported this or if there was some type of military operation, because around Chattanooga there is a military base, but it still doesn't explain the loss of time, and to this day we still have no clue about any of this. And also, on a side note, the bridge that we came up under when this happened is not even in the Chattanooga area. It's actually around the South Pittsburgh area, which is almost 40 minutes from where my daughter's house is, where we had dropped the granddaughter off. And we had just dropped her off within 15 minutes prior to this happening. Like I said, I'm a schedule freak, and so I'm OCD with watching the clock. Thanks for the podcast, Derek and Sarah. We absolutely love it, and finally became Patreon, so you can continue with the best podcast there is out here. Keep up the amazing work. Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you, caller. 7 black triangle UFOs. You know, I can't say that I've ever heard of a sighting of that many of these particular craft. I think I've heard of 2, maybe even 3, but 7 is downright crazy. I've been in a similar situation, and I can understand why the caller couldn't take a photo. But I do wonder if anyone else in the area did. Or was it perhaps caught on some security cam footage somewhere? Or is all of that part of the missing time? And it's that sneaky kind of missing time, too. Not easily noticeable, which somehow makes it even more terrifying. But 7 black triangle UFOs. That is a new one by me. I hope you get some answers, caller. And I hope you at least find out where those missing hours went. That is, if you want to know. Thank you again for calling in. And thank you as well for your support on Patreon. Well, you know, I would categorize this next one as unsettling. Let's see how you score this anonymously submitted call from California.
Hi, Derek. I'm calling anonymously as I'm a government employee, specifically in public and mental health. I live and work in Southern California, and I've always had an interest in the paranormal and the unexplained. But in contrast, my type of work doesn't leave a lot of room for the unexplained. Most always, things need to be backed up with observable evidence. I've had my share of the unexplained situations, some including while I'm working, and because of my position, I'm somewhat had to remain neutral, when inside I'm really psyched about the whole thing. On one occasion, while talking to a few coworkers just making small talk, we clearly overheard the typing of a keyboard from one of the desks on the far end of the room, but no one was there, so that was kind of odd. That sparked a whole conversation about how people have heard the unexplained footsteps in the hallways when coworkers have stayed after hours in the office, or people just getting the sensation they're not alone. I've experienced something similar on a particular Saturday when I walked into the office after I had left my wallet behind. I had been in the office after hours on other occasions to pick up like my charger or a Tupperware, and everything worked out fine. But on this occasion, I got a heavy feeling once I stepped into the office. I got this intense feeling of negativity, almost hostile, like I was in immediate danger. Now, I work with all sorts of people in my profession, some including having severe aggression and explosive outbursts. And let me tell you, it takes something pretty intense to have me that fearful for my safety. And on this occasion, it got me there the instant I walked in. So I walk in, get to my office, and I immediately locked my door while I searched for my wallet. Once I found it, I left. I made sure everything was locked, including the main door to the building. Now this gets weirder. Once I began to walk away from the building to my car, the main door began to jerk, as if someone were trying to open the door forcefully, but was unable to because it was locked. Part of me wondered if it was a glitch from the system that operates the accessibility button for people with disabilities that you find at most government buildings. I got into my car and watched the door jerk for about a minute before it stopped. I don't know what that was, but here's something that happened this week when meeting with the child patient. I'm talking to this kid about their symptoms, and the lights turn off randomly. She looked at me super wide-eyed, and I try to play it off saying the lights are motion censored. They're not. This is an old-ass building. Funding doesn't go for that feature. So as we walk over to turn on the lights turn on, just like that. I see the switch and remain the same. The electricity didn't go out. No one else was there, so I don't know what that was. But here I am, remaining cool and neutral. So there you go. Hopefully this makes it. Thanks, Derek.
Thank you, caller. You know, I wonder if hazard pay is inappropriate for some of these jobs. It sounds like a few of these places were downright uncomfortable to work at. I've had a few jobs like that. Unfortunately, though, ghosts weren't to blame. Regardless, it's scary stuff, caller. And we thank you again for sharing your experiences. Now, before we move on to this next and almost final call, stick around to the very end of the episode. Per usual, I've hidden a call back there that's all sorts of unnerving. So don't be part of the 12 to 15% that shuts the episodes off early and misses one extra call. We call it the secret call, and it's typically a wild one. And I promise that tonight's is no exception. Don't forget to stick around till after the outro. But first, one of my favorite calls from this collection. A real trip. Welcome to the program, anonymous caller.
Hi, I am calling to let you guys know about an experience that I had out here at Dugway, Utah last year, 2023, springtime, so pretty much the same time of year. It's late in the evening, and I just wrapped up another day of work, feeling exhausted, but eager to get back home to my family. I anticipated my long drive ahead, so I made a quick stop at the vending machine to grab an energy drink, hoping to stave off the fatigue for my 600-mile drive home. So with my drink in hand, I head to my car and leave the parking lot, ready to hit the road and leave post behind. So the night's dark, and with the new moon overhead, visibility is limited, so I turn on my brights to see everything on the road. Knowing full well the abundance of wildlife in the area, I have wild horses, pronghorn, coyotes, jackrabbits, and any other creature you might see in the high plains desert. So just as I'm getting used to the darkness and just leaving work, something catches my eye at the edge of my headlights. A figure grows up out of the asphalt at the edge of my headlights. I just watched this thing appear. So this sends a chill down my spine, and I move over into the oncoming lane so as to avoid hitting it. I've slowed down, and I'm watching this thing very intently because it's scaring me. Its silhouette looks like someone is sitting on their heels and holding their legs with their head in between their knees. It's very fleshy, and before I could fully comprehend what I'm looking at, it morphs into a large canine, or a wolf or a coyote, I'm not sure exactly. And then the same way it came up, it went back down into the asphalt. I didn't see anything go off to either side of the road. At this point, I'm at a full stop looking at it from a distance. And seeing that it's not there in the road anymore, I carry on, and, I'm shaken, but I'm determined to continue and, carry on with my drive. Now, an hour into my drive, I'm driving through some hills, And I come across something that's pretty unsettling. It was a young coyote on the roadside, and it's got its mouth stretched wide open as far as it could go, like it's yawning, but it's fixed, and it's staring at me. It's freaking me out, Don't really know what to think of it. And then, and half an hour later, another one, a young coyote, just fixated on my car with the same wide open mouth. Now, since that night, I haven't encountered anything quite like it, but the memory of those strange encounters still lingers, reminding me that sometimes the most unsettling things happen when we least expect them.
Thank you for calling in. Now let's start by pointing out that Dugway, Utah is said to be the new Area 51. Area 52, I've even heard it called. So who knows what sort of activity is going on up there. There have been some gnarly experiments that have taken place on base. In fact, back in 1968, it's believed that a nerve gas demonstration at the top-secret facility got out of control and ended up killing over 6,000 sheep on nearby ranches. Trust me when I say bad stuff happens up there. Is it connected to our caller story? That's not really for me to determine. But I can determine that this entry is all kinds of terrifying, and possibly a little ironic, if I'm using that term correctly. Our caller never really mentions Skinwalker, although unlike most calls that do mention Skinwalker, this one actually checks off some of the necessary boxes. The location is somewhat correct. The creature in question transforms from a human shape to a canine of some sort, and the creature seemingly chased or followed the man many miles, appearing as a coyote along the side of the road. That all sounds like the Skinwalker legend to me. So imagine yourself driving down a long, desolate road, the high desert breeze rushing through your open windows. Then you see it, something ahead you can neither identify nor comprehend. A shape that is both human and animal. A shape that's not a shape at all. I think you best put up the windows and drive straight ahead. Thank you again, caller, for sharing your experience here with us. And folks, that's going to do it for this special episode, but not really. I have one more call to play after the outro, and trust me, it's a doozy. But first, Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Copyright Red Crow Media. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Delaney Bowers. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. Please follow us on social media and YouTube. And if you can, leave us a rate and review wherever possible. And don't forget to check out our film, Shadows in the Desert, High Strangeness in the Borrego Triangle. Just visit borregotriangle.com for more details. And finally, tonight's score was provided by Iron Cthulhu Apocalypse, Co.ag Music, and Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Now I'll save all the sappy stuff for the true ending of the episode. But for now, I'll just say, I'll see you on the other side.
Will be sent to you this month. You know,
It's just a little.
Hello, folks. Thanks for following me all the way to the end. For that, you will be rewarded by way of this lengthy but fascinating call by a gentleman that we will simply identify as Officer.
Hello. This incident occurred in July of 2019. My background is in law enforcement. I am a 15-year intermediate SWAT officer and lone wolf operator in the state of Idaho. Now, this day was my day off. However, I just finished a block of training and weapons qualification for SWAT, and I picked up an overtime shift over the night shift. Covering down is the on-duty supervisor. So I just checked into service. It was about 8 o'clock, and looking over the calls for the day on the CAD in my patrol vehicle to see if anything needed to be followed up with or what my officers in my quadrant of the city that night are doing, when dispatch messaged me and requested that I respond to one of the officers at a suspicious circumstance case. For us, in the system that we use that classifies our cases, anything kind of odd, unexplainable, or out of the ordinary is classified as a suspicious circumstance until we can determine otherwise. The officer at that call is a fellow SWAT officer of mine that I've known for several years. I'm going to refer to him as 6, as that is the last digit in his badge number. 6 requested I respond to him to assist him. So I quickly looked up the call notes and saw that there is a son at his mother's home. He could hear noise coming from the basement. Also had these power of attorney over the home and his mom, and wants officers to go in the basement and take a look at it. Now, that time of night, with distance that he was away and with nighttime traffic, it took me about 15-20 minutes to get to him, because it was the outskirts of the city at an old farm home. And when I pulled up, I observed it was an old yellow stucco farm home with a rock foundation. You could even see the old knob and tube wiring coming off the home. As I pulled in the driveway, I noticed 6 was at the end of the driveway talking to an adult male, and there was an elderly female on a porch and an old bench. Not looking super pleased that the police were there, but truthfully, most days people aren't pleased when the police are at their home. So I updated dispatch that I was on scene, exited my patrol vehicle, made my way over 6 and this individual, and asked what had been going on. And the son explained to me that he'd come over to his mom's house to visit, and while they were talking, he heard some noises coming from the basement, some kind of bumping, like maybe something getting knocked over. And he didn't think anything of it at first. It's an older home, and maybe there's some kind of an animal down there, so he just kind of shrugged it off. But as it happened more frequently, and then started to hear voices coming from the basement, he became concerned and asked his mom if anyone was down there. And she gave him an answer that he didn't like. He kept saying she would just say it was the others, and she wouldn't give him a straight answer. And he pulled out of his back pocket his paperwork saying he's the power of attorney. I quickly looked over the paperwork, and it all seemed to be in order. And as I was doing that, his mom started to get up and walk over toward us, and he asked that we search the home to make sure that no one was squatting down there or taking advantage of his mother, and also told us that the basement isn't habitable. It's an old dirt floor with no power down there. And when he wanted to go downstairs and take a look, his mother became very agitated with him. It was around that point that his mom had got to me and walked over and asked if I was the supervisor, and I told her I was and gave her my name. And she grabbed my hand and looked at it and held it and just said, "You're a nice boy. Both of you are nice boys, and I don't want you to go in the basement." And I asked why, and she got kind of irritated and rolled her eyes and huffed a little bit, and I told her I understand. I understand that she's told her son, that she's told my officer, and now I'm asking her to tell me too. But we were called there, and we're only trying to help to the best of our abilities. So she explained that it's the others. And when I said, "What do you mean by others?" she got irritated again and said, "Well, they're the others. They were here before me. They'll be here after me. They won't want you there, and it will cause problems if you go downstairs. And I kind of looked over at Six, who had this look on his face, and I've learned to trust Six and his gut feelings and premonitions that he gets. He and I have served as SWAT officers together for years. I've been his commanding officer. It's been his gut feelings that have gotten us both out of some bad incidences alive. He always says it's because he's in tune with his surroundings and his heritage of being Native American, that he credits these gut feelings or promptings. And I politely explained to the older woman that her son does have power of attorney, and he's asked us to be there and to clear the property. And she threw her hands up and said, I know, I understand he's in charge. And I thanked her for her understanding. And I asked the folks if they'd stand off to the side while I had a moment to visit with Six. Because again, I could see that he was feeling something. And so when they're away out of earshot, I asked him, I said, what is going on? And he just said, sir, there is a fog. There is a mist of blackness surrounding this property. And there is something in that home. And so I acknowledged his statement, let the folks know we were going to be heading into the home, and updated dispatch that would be in the home, and made our way there. We opened the front door, and as you walked in, it kind of led us into a kitchen greeting area. Past that was a double swinging door into a living room, but we were taking a left through the kitchen and over to where the garage was. So we get over the hallway where the garage was, and have our weapons at a low ready, because as we're in the home, we can hear voices which sound angry coming from the basement. And so Six opens the door. I stand off to the side, on the side that it opens from, so I can take an advantage of seeing through the door first. It opens, and just like any old basement opens, you can feel the cold air coming, kind of the damp mist or odor coming from it. And I started to make my way toward the doorway. I activated my light on my weapon, and as soon as I crossed through the threshold of that doorway down the stairs, it felt like every bit of exposed skin on my hands, neck, and face were under attack by pins and needles. It wasn't unbearable, it was absolutely uncomfortable. And I made my way down the steps, and the steps were very narrow, very, very steep, very similar to like a boat, where the ladder or steps going from different floors, you have to turn around and go down backwards because they're so steep. And anyways, when I get to the bottom, I see off to my left are some old boilers, and again, there's no light, so it's just the light that we brought with us. And old boilers off to the left where the home was converted over the years from wood to oil, and then later on, whatever kind of heat. And then to our right is steps going up to a bulkhead out of the basement. But in between those is a very small doorway. I call Six down to me, and he comes down, and as he breaks through the doorway, he says, "Do you feel that?" I told him I do, and I don't like it. And so he came down, went down past me and around, and then moved off to the left, and then I moved off to the right. And we're standing at roughly 45-degree angles from those doorways, so we can cross-cover each other through that doorway. And don't hear anything at this point. And I give him the nod, and I go first. I compress my weapon into me, step through at a 45-degree angle, and he does opposite of me, because like I said, we're cross-covering into a small rectangular room. And if you split that room down the center, saying 12 is at the top, 6 is at the bottom, 6 is in the number, not 6 is my backup officer. I covered the 6 up to 12 area, and then Officer 6, if you will, covers from the 12 down to the 6 area. Now, we both notice that there's a few little wooden trinkets here and there, cardboard boxes, but nothing stacked, nothing where a human being could hide. But at the 12 o'clock of the room is a small wooden
rocking horse, a white rocking horse with the paint has been faded and chipped over the years. I remember the tail and mane were just a dingy white from being used over the years. And I remember seeing that rocking horse and just becoming fixated on it and not knowing why. And just kind of this feeling of kind of a heavy feeling coming over us, almost a depressing feeling or hopeless feeling coming over us. And then a few moments later, my radio went off with my dispatcher doing what's called a security check on us, wanting to make sure they were safe. And I kind of shook it off and thought, well, that's weird. We've been in the home for under a couple minutes. They're aware of what we're doing, and it's not ordinary for them to security check us in these incidents so that we can keep our total attention on clearing a structure and what's potentially around us. And so I responded back with my badge number that both units are code 4 and looked over at 6 and shined a little splash over light on him, and he seemed kind of dazed, kind of wide-eyed, and I shook him and kind of brought him back to reality, if you will. And he looked at me and he asked if I was okay, and I said I am, and he said he was okay, and we started to work our way back out of that room and up the stairs and out of the home. And as we got further away from that room, that hopelessness, that depressing feeling, that heaviness that was on us got better. It minimized as we moved away. And so up in the kitchen, we took a moment to kind of gather ourselves and thought, that's really odd. When we're done with this, we're going to visit on what happened, and then exited the home, and where we met again with the son and the elderly female that lives there. And she had this very smirk look on her face, and she recognized maybe the looks on our face, and she said, "Didn't feel good, did it? You should have listened, shouldn't you?" And I just, smiled, acknowledged her statement respectfully, and looked at the son and explained that we didn't find anyone, that there's no one down there. And he thanked us for our time, and we moved on, notified dispatch that we're clear, and headed back to our vehicles. And the old lady just continued to smirk at us as we walked away. Now, when I got to my patrol vehicle, my CAD, my dispatcher, sent me a message and said, "What took you so long?" And I had no clue what she meant. 6 was standing right next to me, and I wrote back, "What are you talking about? We're in the home for a few minutes." And she said, "I security checked you at 10 minutes. You were in the house for 10 minutes before I checked on you." And I looked at 6, and he looked at me, and that's not possible. We weren't in the home that long. We were only in there for a few minutes, and we have a lot of years of clearing buildings together, and we moved quite quickly as we did it. So we looked down at my watch, and I realized, well, a significant amount of time had actually gone by. So we went back to the office and took our watch guard body cameras off, popped them on the dock, and a few minutes later they both uploaded, and we looked at them. Now, when we cleared that small room and both of us turned toward that wooden rocking horse, we both froze. We both stood there. For 7 minutes, we both stared at that wooden rocking horse, not moving, not saying a sound. You could hear us breathing in and out, until my dispatcher security checked us and kind of brought us back to reality. Neither of us had any kind of recollection of that amount of time going by. But it is what it is. There's a lot going on in the city that night, and so we moved on to the next calls and classified as suspicious circumstance, building clear, no one inside. That's not where the incident ended, though. A few months later, I checked into service again on a patrol shift, and it just happened to be driving through that area because I remember the incident. And as I drove by the property, that son that we visited with before was out front, and he was pushing one of those really thin wire metal for sale signs in the front yard. So I updated dispatch that I'd be out of my patrol vehicle and at a certain residence, and exited and walked up to him. And I said hello and introduced myself and asked if he remembered me. And he said, absolutely, I remember you. You guys were great when you came over. And thanked us again for what we did that day. And I acknowledged his statement and pointed down at the for sale sign and said, you're selling the home? And he said, yes. He said, about a week or so ago, he called his mom and she was up and moving around, and told her that he would be over later in the afternoon to come check on her. And when he had got there that afternoon, he couldn't find her in the home, but the door to the basement was open. And when he went down to the basement, he had found her and she had passed. And I extended my condolences to him, and he thanked me again for my time, and I parted ways. And that is where this incident ends. Thank you for your time. Really enjoy listening to your show. Found it recently, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you, officer. Well, that's one I've never heard of. Missing time caused by, well, seemingly nothing, I guess. At least nothing visual. Now, I'd love to get my hands on that body cam footage, although something tells me that's probably not possible. Now, other than that, I'm not sure I have a lot of commentary on this call. Not for negative reasons, but more so because it's nearly left me speechless. To call it unsettling just doesn't do it justice. And calls like this simply leave me asking more questions than giving answers. Like, what did that lady know that the rest of them did not? Who were the others? What happened to the men during this time? And what the hell is the deal with that rocking horse? Now, if somehow the new owners of this home are listening, please get a hold of me. I'd love to know if the activity has continued and learn the fate of this haunted rocking chair. In fact, I saw one for sale just last year. Could it be the same one?
This haunted rocking horse is going up for auction in England on July 30th. Once owned by a psychic medium and ghost hunter in the 1940s, it's said to have a child spirit attached to it. The horse has been passed down through generations, with reports of it moving from room to room on its own. The current owner is uneasy about keeping it and decided to sell it with a warning about its spooky history. Some believe it's a gimmick to increase the selling price, expected to be $250 to $400.
Now, that clip courtesy of Clint's Stranger Zone. And believe it or not, the rocking horse actually sold for a whopping 1,750 pounds, or about $2,200 US. So that thing better be haunted. Others just like it sold for much, much less. I actually found the listing and can see that dozens exactly like it have been sold as well, some as low as 150 pounds. So go on over to the show notes and have a look for yourself. Does that rocking horse look haunted to you? Now, as for our caller's rocking horse, something ain't right about that one. And I want to know what that is. So thank you, officer, for leaving us with this mystery. And a huge thanks to all the callers that have helped us kick off this, our 17th season of MAU. I have some big things in store for us this year, so be sure to tune in each and every Thursday to get your weekly dose of the strange, terrifying, and the unusual. There will be no Beyond episode this evening, but I'll be back on schedule with that next week. If you haven't joined us over there, I encourage you to do so. Just visit our Patreon account and click the $1 level for ad-free content, and the $5 level for all the extra content. And don't forget to take advantage of our 7-day free trial. Just hit the Patreon link at monstersamonguspodcast.com. Alright folks, that's it for me this evening. Thank you for stopping by. Keep your eyes open out there. And if anyone asks, just tell them that you're keeping it spooky. Have a good night.